Okay, Carson, if you tell me we have enough core members here to begin, then we will go ahead and get started.
Looks like we have about 138. I'll put up share the screen here. Let's see. There we go.
Great. Thank you. And we are recording. Welcome, friends. Thank you for being here with us electronically. We appreciate your participation today in what we expect will be an eventful and really full, really excellent LPC meeting today. I think we anticipate a robust discussion. We have a lot to go over, and we appreciate your participation. This is the Legislative Policy Committee for the Utah League of Cities and Towns. Today is February 8th, 2021. My name is Dawn Ramsey, and I serve as mayor of the city of South Jordan and serve also as chair of the LPC this year. And just welcome all of you for being here. The first item of business that I want to cover before we get to the minutes is really some logistics. Today, we may have a lot of people who want to weigh in, and so just a heads up, and I'll probably give this reminder a little later as well. Please use the chat to do your comments. Obviously, we're still working with an electronic format, which is a little unique, but it's worked really well to this point. When you make a comment in the chat, if you would please address it to all panelists and everyone or all attendees, you have to click on that so everyone in the meeting can see it. Otherwise, it just comes to the few of us who you can see here on the screen. And we try to repeat those, read those back, and address every single comment. But if you could address them to everyone, then everyone in this meeting will be able to see it. And we think that will be really helpful. All right, with that, thank you for your patience. And here we go. The first item of business we have is that we need to adopt the minutes from our February 1st, 2021 LPC meeting. Anyone had the opportunity? Okay, you know what? We need to do that first as well, right? Carson, do you want everybody to log on as a voting member, right? We'll take our first motion and our first vote on the minutes in the chat. And then we're going to have the link where everybody who is a voting member can please sign up to vote on some of these questions that we'll have a little later. So keep in mind that's coming. Initially, it looks like I have a motion to approve the minutes as they've been sent out. And thanks for your patience as we do get a lot of these. We're trying to sift through all of them, but we get a lot that come in. So we have a motion by Mark and a second by Tawny Barker for the minutes. So all in favor of approving the minutes as they've been sent out from our February 1st meeting, please indicate so in the chat. And I will look to Carson or Roger to let us know when we have reached the threshold that we need to in order to move on.
I would guess that's sufficient.
I think we're there.
Okay, thank you to all of you. Those minutes are approved. Okay, we're going to turn time over to Victoria. We're going to discuss just really the legislative outlook and the outreach that's being done. So we'll turn time over. Our staff is working very hard. I'd like to take just a quick personal second to soapbox a little bit. They don't know I'm going to do this, but our staff here at the Utah League of Cities and Towns has been working tirelessly. They do every session, they do all the time, but an inordinate amount of work. And I want to thank them in behalf of all of the cities and towns across the state. Thank you for all you're doing to try to help us make sure that we reach the best policy outcomes for cities and the work that we're trying to achieve. Thank you to all of you. And now with that, Victoria, I'll turn it to you.
Well, thank you, Mayor. We really appreciate that. And, you know, that's our job is to be busy during session, but it has definitely been a busy session for the circumstances we're in, which is we're not actually on the Hill all the time. So it's an odd session, but somehow it's been a lot busier too. Carson, if you would just go to the next slide. And We'll touch on our policy prisms that we have here. I know that everyone is fairly familiar with them, but I just want to review them again as we go through bills. And this is the part of the meeting where we all check in with all of you to see if you're reaching out to your legislators and talking to them. We really need you to reach out to your legislators. It's one thing for league staff to go in and testify on committees and to negotiate on these bills, but the real push comes from all of you. If you are reaching out to your legislators and talking to them, that's what we need you to do, especially on some of these high priority bills that we are going to be discussing today. And so, what we need is for you to talk to your legislators about these bills, talk to them about growth issues in your city with housing, transportation. We sometimes see a real disconnect between legislators and what housing and policy growth looks like on the ground. Give them specific examples of projects you've worked on, obstacles you've run into, what you're hearing from your residents on growth and transportation, or any other issues in your city. We'd encourage you to reach out in your social media, get out there and campaign on some of these bills, help your residents understand what the legislature is doing and raise awareness of those things. And then as always, you can go to the League website. If you click on legislative advocacy, you can find under the priorities button our policy guide, which we've sent out in Friday Facts. We've sent to legislators, but it gives really good talking points on housing and growth and also public safety. So even though it's hard to do this far into session, we're only at the halfway point. This is the time when it really matters. So we're going to just do a quick poll. And I see from Shannon that Provo Council has been calling and texting, emailing. So kudos to Provo. Thank you so much. And I bet I've missed some other ones in there. I know Spanish Fork has done a lot of outreach. Logan has done a lot of outreach. West Jordan looks like. So keep it up. And those of you who haven't, we'd ask that you would start to do that as we get into the final weeks of session. So Carson, I think we have a poll just to take the temperature of how many have actually reached out to their legislators. We have that.
Before we do that, can we, I just want to do a quick pitch for the voting system before we close that registration process. Again, I dropped the link earlier and you saw the slides, and it looks like we have quite a few folks signing up to vote. We currently have looks like 70 voters right now. So please, for all of you who are registered LPC voters, go ahead and register by clicking that link above, and please keep that web page open. You'll see the PowerPoint slides when there is not an open vote, and then once we hear a motion and open a vote, then you'll be prompted. So please, all LPC voters, go ahead and do that. And I will, hopefully this is not too confusing, but for those of you who've already done that step, while we're just waiting for a few more to fill it out, I'm going to open up a little poll just within the Zoom call. Again, polls don't have to be LPC voters. So if you've already finished registering, then I'm going to open that up and you can do that while we wait.
Thanks, Carson. Didn't mean to get ahead of you there. We definitely want to get all our voting software in line, so we're ready to go. Looks like there's another request for the link again, if you want to put that in the chat. So Carson's just put up the Zoom poll. This is not an official vote. Anyone can vote on it, unlike the official position voting. So if you have a second to fill out the Zoom poll about contacting your legislator about these big bills, HB 98, 82, or 61. So 98 is the plan review and inspection bill for Representative Ray. HB 82 is Representative Ward's ADU bill, and SB 61 is Senator Sandals' Billboard bill.
While you're filling out that little poll question, I'm going to go ahead and close the voting registration page. So I'll give 30 more seconds for people to trickle in, but it looks like we have a pretty strong number of voters here. So I'm closing that.
While Carson puts up those Zoom poll results, I've seen a lot in the chat of cities that have reached out to their legislators. So thank you, thank you. So on those big three bills, 84% have reached out. This is fantastic. But we don't want anyone resting on their laurels. We're going to need you to keep it up. So please keep reaching out. If you haven't, do it this week. The midpoint of session is right now, and this is when the deals start brokering, and the end is not quite in sight, but we're getting there, and legislators start to really listen in and are starting to take final votes even on some bills that have passed either all the way through the House to the Senate or vice versa. So please reach out, and thank you to all of you who have and keep it up. We really appreciate it. All right, here are our policy prisms, and as we go through these bills, again, the questions we as league staff ask: does it respect the traditional role of local government? Is the bill one size fits all? And we're seeing a lot of that this session. And will it result in an unfunded mandate or a workable mandate? Carson, if you would go on to next. We're going to start with our land use bills. This touches on those three big bills that we were just discussing in the poll. So let's get right into it.
Sorry, my internet's a little bit slow today.
That's okay. They're doing some construction downstairs, so I'm not sure if you can hear over the pounding. All right, thanks, Carson. So we've discussed this bill previously. This is SB 61. This is Senator Sandals' billboard bill. And the next bill we'll discuss is Senator Hinkins' billboard bill. Senator Sandals' bill really touches on the mandate that a city allow a static billboard sign convert to an electronic billboard sign. And it also has language in there creating a very restrictive curfew and changing some of the illumination standards. So we've had 3 meetings with Senator Sandal, 2 with him in industry, 1 with just Senator Sandal. As we mentioned last time, Senator Sandal really sees this as an equity issue. He feels that if you have a zone that allows electronic digital on-premise signs, then those signs that are off-premise should also have the same ability to be digital or electronic. And it's our understanding that there has been some case law to show that it is problematic if a zone treats those on-premise signs differently than off-premise. So the way we've approached negotiations with him and the billboard industry is to try and target that discrepancy. So there is some equality within those zones, but not allowing for further expansion of digital billboards. So for example, if a billboard is located in a zone that would be allowing digital billboards, it can't necessarily move to a zone where there are no on-premise or off-premise digital signs. We discussed with them curfew standards. They actually, although their language, the bill language comes from them about curfews, they said they would come back with something different on curfews. They feel like the technology has changed in the last few years, allowing for greater dimming or blocking of billboards without having to turn them off. And I see Paul's note about size. So we brought up size and height with Senator Sandal, pointing out to him that, you know, the sign on a bakery, on the front door of a bakery, on-premise sign is going to be a lot smaller than a huge billboard. Senator Sandal will not, he said size and height are non-starters for him, and he's not willing to put any restrictions on billboards. So as far as the height and sign. So where we are with that is we are waiting for language to come back from industry. They told us they would get it today or tomorrow. And we will continue negotiating with them on this bill. Let's see, it sounds like we might have a hand raised from John Hiskey. Carson, I don't know if you can get John in there. Our current position on this bill is oppose. And I'll go on, if we can get John in, but I'll go on to the next bill, which is Senator Hinkins' Billboard bill, which we also oppose.
My apology. You answered my question.
Okay, thanks, John.
Thank you so much. Sorry.
All right, Carson, if you would go on to the next slide. All right, today in Senate Natural Resources this afternoon is Senator Hinkins' bill. It's SB 144. And this bill we also oppose, if not even more so than Senator Sandals' bill. So what you should know about this bill is that it says a municipality cannot directly or indirectly prevent a property owner from building or maintaining a billboard by incentivizing, compensating, or encouraging the property owner to discontinue and terminate a billboard. So if you own a piece of property and it has a billboard lease on it, and that billboard lease is about to expire, and maybe the property owner wants to look at other options rather than having a billboard on it, and wishes to approach the city to potentially buy out on that lease, offer them something else to terminate that billboard right, and therefore giving the property owner something in return for not having the billboard. This bill would prohibit that. And we really see this as honestly a property rights issue. You know, there's no reason for the legislature to tell an individual property owner that they can't go and look for offers from any party, which may include local government, to help them realize value in their property. The bill also says that a municipality may not, as a condition of a permit to build or maintain a billboard, require the landowner or developer to take an action unrelated to the billboard. It says that when a municipality sells municipal land, they may not restrict the purchaser's ability to place a billboard on real property. And this can become an issue in, for example, redevelopment situations, where long-term, if the city sells this property and is looking for it to be redeveloped, if a billboard is placed on it, it makes it much harder for that property to realize its redevelopment potential. And we see this as an unnecessary restriction on the municipality to negotiate how its land is purchased. There's also language in there about if a municipality does these things, that there's damages and attorney fees that may be paid. It prohibits a municipality from requiring a permit from the billboard owner for maintenance or replacing a digital or static face. So again, the billboard companies are trying to get at this this digital conversion by telling municipalities they can't require a permit to do the conversion. And then there's others language in there about the billboard, but ultimately we are opposing this bill. We are not currently negotiating on this bill, and we will continue to work with the billboard industry on Senator Sandals' bill, see what happens to this bill in committee this afternoon. We sent out an alert this morning, but we want to make sure you are all aware of this bill that is out there. Okay, and here's some talking points on this bill. Go talk to your legislators, especially if they are in natural resources, the Senate Natural Resources Committee. Talk to them before this afternoon. The committee starts about 3:30. But in addition, any of your legislators who you come in contact with them, please help them understand that there's a real push from industry this session to tie the hands of municipalities when they are working with billboard companies. And you're welcome to use these talking points and give them explicit examples from your communities of where these bills will make it difficult for you. All right. Let's see, I'm just making sure I haven't missed anything. Okay. Oh, so let's see. Isaac Paxman has a question. So yes, I said that size and height are a non-starter for Senator Sandal, but are we sure he won't allow digital billboards only where on-premise digital signs of a certain size are allowed? in a given zone. It does seem crazy that 2-foot square digital sign in a bakery window means a billboard gets to be digital. Yes, Isaac, it does seem crazy. Oh, and that is what Senator Sandals means. He feels like billboards. I mean, I'm not sure I can explain his reasoning on this, but other than he does see it as a total non-starter, and he doesn't see a difference. And I apologize for the hammering. I'm not sure what's happening underneath me, but hopefully you can hear me. All right, Carson, if you go to the next slide. Okay, now we're going to venture into the housing bills. We've talked a lot about these, but we wanted to just put up these objectives as ULCT sees them going on through session. You know, House leadership and the business groups want to increase supply, the number of, and specifically with ADUs, the number of internal ADUs. They want minimum standards across cities. They want to reduce unnecessary city regulations that they see inhibiting affordable housing. They want a recourse for property owners dealing with bad actor cities. This comes into play a lot with HB 98. And there is interest in investing in state infrastructure. That would be transportation, transit, broadband, et cetera. And also the economic development component of that. And we go back to our resolution that you as members adopted to that, yes, we do want to increase the housing supply, but cities have no keys over market forces. We don't build houses, we create the pathway for them to be built. We can't control the price of labor or materials. We also want to preserve local legislative authority to plan communities. That's a lot of times what attracts people to and into a neighborhood is how the city has planned for and developed a community. We want to preserve local regulations of health, safety, and welfare. And as part of this initiative, we want to make sure we preserve local revenues that fund services and infrastructure, and we want to partner with the state. So having said that, let's, and those are kind of our big picture objectives as we're negotiating these bills. Let's go to the next slide, Carson. This was a piece that was on Fox 13 just last week, talking about some homeowners who have newly constructed homes, but have construction flaws in them and how difficult it is for them to get those defects addressed from the builders, and the frustration that some of these homes may not be built to code, or how difficult it is to get those construction flaws remedied. And, you know, this has been kind of our message to legislators on particularly HB 98, that cities serve as a good check. Whereas if a builder or developer is allowed to inspect their own construction, that it will be much harder for homeowners to be able to get those flaws addressed. And there's potential for health and safety issues. Carson, if you would go to the next slide. So I'm going to probably hand it over to Gary Crane. I think Gary, if Gary is out there, we'll get Gary to talk about HB 98. As a reminder, this is Representative Ray's bill, and this bill says that a builder can hire their own, which could mean themselves, their own person to do plan reviews and inspections. It also says that cities cannot set certain design standards. This is a continuation from HB 374 last year. Gary and a group of our great city attorneys who volunteered to help us up here on the Hill has been negotiating a lot with the Home Builders Association on this bill. And so Gary, if Carson's able to pull you up, I will turn it over to you to discuss HB 98.
Okay, thanks, Victoria. Appreciate that. And thank you, Carson, for pulling me up. HB 98 was a continuation of a bill. In fact, it's just the resubmittal of a bill from last year. Last year, we were able to put together some amendments to Paul Ray's bill. Last year, it recommended that we would a total preemption of our local inspection and plan review authority, as well as a severe restriction on our being able to apply design standards. In fact, it was a total prohibition against our application of any design standards. We put together some studies for the representative, which we collected over the summer, and thank you for everybody that participated in those. However, when we ended up in presenting those, we still ended up with a battle with the home builders over whether or not those statistics were accurate. We think they were. They're arguing that because of usually anecdotes out there where individuals, cities have been involved in something that appears to the Home Builders Association to be improper. The league, I'm sure, handles many of those, as do many of the members of the league who are involved in planning, zoning, and that type of thing. But the bottom line is it resulted in the Representative Ray filing HB 98 this year, and HB 98 this year was identical pretty much to last year's bill. As you see on your screen, the things that HB 98 were aimed at is all residential and commercial construction. It presented a total preemption of plan review. In other words, a builder could actually determine to go a different direction on plan review and hire their own plan reviewer. And they could also hire their own building inspector, essentially at their option. It would exclude the city entirely. In addition, all building permit fees, if they elected to do that for plan review and for building inspection, would be reimbursed back to the builder or not paid by the builder if they had not, if they elected to do that from the very beginning. Once again, this is on both residential and commercial, which was kind of devastating if you consider the detail that goes into a commercial building or even a multifamily building. Not to mention single family residential. On the design standards side, his bill preempts almost all design standards, both interior and exterior, for residential, commercial, and multifamily dwellings. And the only exceptions that were listed in the bill were FEMA exceptions, National Flood Insurance exceptions, and then buildings on the National Historic Register. So we have been meeting with both leadership in the House, who feels very, very strongly that something needs to be done. The speed with which permits are being issued in most jurisdictions, I think we're handling it, but in some jurisdictions, we have horror stories essentially of permits being extended further and further out. We've got some permits that I've had it been shown that were actually 6 months or more old. Plan reviews that have been 90 days or more in review, and it's not just a matter of sending them out for legitimate technological reviews, but it's just that either there hasn't been enough staff available to do it, or there have been other issues such as staff being on vacation. So what we've done is we've gotten together a group of individuals to look at this, including building inspectors and attorneys and representatives from the various cities out there. And I appreciate all the help that we have received from cities to actually pick through this bill and see what we could come up with. And essentially, if you go to the next slide, Carson, I can tell you where we are today. Right now, our position on the bill is opposed, and we would encourage us to continue as a league in that position until we come up with language that is acceptable to the league. And what we did was we went back to what we had agreed to, not last year, but the year before, when it came to the time periods for plan review. And I think it was almost 6 years ago that we put a limitation on the time period for inspections. We went back to those two time periods and indicated to the Home Builders Association that we were not willing to accept preemption on those two, that we would we would be willing to live by what we agreed to in the past, but we were not willing to exceed that and just allow them to preempt our local ordinances and our local permitting. And so we have been negotiating with them, and they've come back with, in dealing both with leadership in the House and also with the sponsor of the bill and members of the Home Builders Association. This is where we are today. Right now, if we were to redraft the bill, it would only apply to single family duplex or townhouse, which are the types of structures that are subject to the 14-day plan review. The plan review would still be 14 days. And at the end of 14 days, the city would be required to issue a permit. If the stamps or if the plans were stamped by an engineer or architect, they would be able to proceed with construction of the building. And then it would be subject to inspection by our inspectors. If we elect, or if we are unable to inspect the building within 3 days after the initial inspection is requested, then the builder would be permitted to hire their own inspector and be able to complete the inspection with their own inspector. Right now, the only difference between those two are in the 14-day provision, there's a swing out if we have to send it back to either a technical reviewer or to a specialist of some sort. And because of the fact that perhaps a municipality does not have that ability to be able to double check that type of information. Good example of that is geotechnical issues. Right now, we're talking to the home builders about that concern, because if we do have to send it back for specialized technical issues, we do not want that to count towards the 14 days, kind of pretty much as it is. That seems to be a little bit of a sticking point with them, because they say that cities are abusing that and sending it back to the engineer for very, very small things, or for things that are not significant and not technical in nature. And so we're currently discussing that and currently trying to get an exception for those things that are truly technical, additional technical standards that we don't have the capability of performing. On the inspections, that's exactly the way the law reads today, is that there's 3 days to do the inspections. Right now, it reads that the city is to hire the inspector, but that is not happening in very many cases. And the builders are actually, they're saying that when they do request that they're getting not only pushback from some cities, but actual animosity from some cities. And so we thought the easiest way to resolve that is just to allow the builder to hire at the end of 3 days, if they choose to, a building inspector that is qualified and licensed to inspect. Let's move to the next slide. Moving on to design standards. And I realize there's a lot of questions coming in on this stuff, so hang in there with me while we go over the negotiations on design standards. But let's see, we're missing something. Was there a slide in between this and the design standard? Okay, maybe not. So the design standards that they were trying to preempt us on, let me just tell you a little bit about where we started and where we ended up. I have to shift over to my screen here. Okay, so essentially, I'm going to just kind of summarize where we're ending up. A lot of cities, and you've all heard the story about 100% brick being required, and you know, maybe a pitched roof that would be impossible for everybody to meet. Their argument, and I don't buy it, none of us buy it, but is that these small additions to a home essentially result in an increase in costs, and therefore an increase in the market value of a home. We don't think that that is the case, as much as the market itself setting that value. But nonetheless, there are some things that that it's hard to argue would not increase or decrease the cost of a home. And so as we went through these standards that they had excluded, we agreed that some of them, for example, there's no reason probably why cities ought to be involved in the interior of a home: interior colors, interior design, interior layout, room layout, types of rooms, numbers of rooms, those types of things. That on a single family home, it probably, when we were looking at multifamily and commercial, there was a lot greater concern than there is on single family for these interior design standards. And then there were a few on the exterior as well that we've been negotiating on. Exterior non-structural architectural ornamentation. In other words, city requires that there be dormers or something of that nature. Then the type of roof, the style of roof, the location and design of windows and doors, garage doors, where they're facing or where they're put. And we did exclude rear loading buildings in that. And then the landscaping was another big issue. And we had a lot of pushback from the water conservation groups on our inability to deal specifically with landscaping and fencing requirements. They backed off totally on the fencing requirements. And so we're still, they took that out and did not include that. And then on landscaping, they were persuaded that really the only thing that they were not concerned about, or that they were concerned about, was amounted to the rear yard, front yard, and street facing landscaping. They felt that the cities had a right to be able to deal with that. And even in the rear yard, they indicated that cities probably have the right to, when it comes to water conservation, set standards for the rear yard landscaping. So landscaping was pretty much reduced to, or their prohibition on landscaping was pretty much reduced to the rear yards. And then there's an exclusion specifically for water conservation on all landscaping, whether it be front or back. Fencing, the only requirement there was that we not dictate front yard fencing. In other words, some jurisdictions are mandate that there be front yard fencing, and we didn't think that was a big to give up front yard fencing. Now, this is the important part. Subsection 3 was the exemptions from these design standards, and the exemptions that we've been able to negotiate to date include the 3 that they mentioned, which are FEMA, flood control, historic buildings. However, we did expand historic buildings to also locally designated historic buildings and state designated historic buildings. We also included wildland fire interface rules, design standards agreed to by a development agreement, and then design standards that are applicable to an overlay or other land use regulation, including a planned unit development. So that is excluded from these design standards. What they figure is that if we are bargaining by ordinance for an exchange between the development community of, say, density for a plan that has or includes a lot of these development standards, that we ought to be able to do that. And so that exclusion does exist. And I remember, Evelyn, you were on the phone with us when we talked about that, and planned unit developments are a big deal for us. We didn't want to give up the design standards in those developments, which sometimes present a theme. And so we think that was a big win in negotiation to be able to include that. And then Ogden had a request that older buildings be exempt, older neighborhoods prior to 1940 be included in that. Tiny homes as defined in the IRC, we can continue to regulate those. And let's see, I think, the other concern was one of the prohibitions was on what they call exterior cladding material. That is what you put on the exterior of a home, whether it be brick. This is probably one of the biggest issues probably for most cities, but Ryan Luce from South Jordan ended up in convincing them that there were situations where the exterior of a building was cladded with some type of cladding that was not a good standard even in the industry, and that we ought to be able to prohibit those where either the application or the material itself was defective. So that's kind of where we're at now. And what I want to do, the reason I had Victoria put it on is we don't as a group want necessarily the LPC to take a position different from what they're taking right now, but we wanted to let you know the direction that we were going, that essentially we've been able to get rid of the preemption that was in the bill originally, and kind of focus back on what we had agreed to in the past. It is a little more stringent in that we have to get these permits out within the time periods that we commit to get them out. We checked with our building inspection folks, and they indicated that 90% of the time or better that they're meeting all of these standards anyway. And so I don't think it's going to be a real issue when it comes down to it. The other thing is that most of these builders really don't care if we exceed a few days on any of these standards. They'd rather have the city inspect it, because essentially that's a second set of eyes. And even in relationship to the Channel 13 article that came out, we actually do protect the final property owner from, if the builder were able to inspect it himself, we inspect the buildings for that final property owner, for the homeowner. And many of the builders, the good builders, the reliable and dependable builders, would rather us do that anyway. So really the only place that I can see that this is going to be used is probably in those circumstances where you've got a city that is not able to, is way out there and is way off the mark. And those are the buildings that those are the cities that they would like to kind of rein in a little bit. But anyway, that's kind of where we're at, and kind of I bet you we've got a lot of comments, but anyway, I can't see all the comments, but.
So in the interest of time, I'm going to just ask you three of the questions I've seen in there. So Jeannie Simmons asks, under this, the builder can build under these scenarios, provided that the underlying zoning allows the structure requested. Is that correct?
I think I understand the question. Yes, it doesn't affect the underlying zoning. We still establish what the zoning is. We can also establish, according to, if we get the changes that we want, we can actually establish an overlay zone, which we have control of as well. And we can require those design elements in an overlay zone, such as in a PRUD, where the developer or builder is getting something for the concession of giving those design standards.
And that leads to another question, that for the design standards, that cities would still be able to negotiate in a development agreement. Is that correct?
Yes. If we get what we've negotiated, it does provide for what in the legal world we call a quid pro quo, or something for something, which is the basis for a development agreement. And we do specifically say that development agreement or just setting design standards through a development agreement is allowed. But once again, it's presuming that the developer is getting something for not just approval, for example, but he's getting higher density or narrower streets or something for whatever concessions they're giving up when it comes to design standards.
All right, thanks, Gary. One more and then we'll move on. Seth Perrins asks, can we still deny permits that are submitted for a property where the submitted use may not be allowed? So no 14-day approval on that, right?
Yeah, yes, that's correct. If the use is not allowed, once again, this is really just a design standard bill, and just it is a building bill is what it is. And so when it comes time to actually build the home, you do the plan review and you do the final inspections, but the zoning has already occurred and they would not be able to build something that they were not allowed to build. in the zone if it's not zoned for it. That's correct.
Okay. Thank you so much, Gary. I think that it sounds like your negotiations are getting maybe to the point where there will be some language, and then we can share that once it gets out next week and get an official position on a substitute if we get there.
That's correct. I really would like to gain a sense of whether or not we're headed in the right direction, because if we're not, we've got a long run up a very, very steep hill. But if there's, maybe we do it this way, Victoria, if there's anybody who has really strong feelings that we're going the wrong direction, maybe they could contact either the league, or I don't mind direct contacts, through me or to me, and I can take it back to the group and we can deal with those issues.
Yeah, if people still have questions, and please, my email's at the end. You can contact me. Gary is very nice and has offered that too, and I can collect those and get those to Gary. Our position is still opposed on this bill. Until there's an official substitute out, we wouldn't change that, but it is helpful to get that feedback before the bill's out. So my email is there in the chat, and you're welcome to reach out to me. Thank you, Gary. I appreciate it.
Thanks. And Victoria, maybe I could just say that there's strong support in House leadership for something coming out in this regard. And so if there were a push, it would have to be in the Senate that we pushed. But even the Senate, I think, agrees that there are some good things about this bill in this housing market. So.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And we've got a lot of notes in the chat, and I'll collect those too. So, all right. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think up next is Cam, and he's going to talk about what's sort of the Commission on Housing Affordability bill, sort of. Go ahead, Cam.
Right. Thank you. And greetings, everybody. It's great to see you virtually. And thank you for all of the feedback on 98. This is exactly why we presented it, because if there's something that needs to be brought up in the negotiations, we need to know it. So we will take all these comments. Victoria will gather all of them, and then she and Gary and the rest of the team that's been negotiating it will go through them. So again, if there's anything else, let her know. And then as the bill comes to fruition, we'll bring it back to the LPC for consideration. So I see quite a few comments, Victoria, that are just to panelists. So just make sure you capture the questions that came just to us, as well as the questions to the entire group. Still in the housing front, if you haven't noticed, we warned you weeks ago that House leadership had made housing a top priority for the 2021 session. And so there's 98, and now there's SB 164, which, even though it started in the Senate, is the housing affordability. And they're meeting right now. In fact, I testified there before I jumped over here. One thing, though, I want to provide in terms of context. I'm sure you all share the same concern that we do as league staff, that it feels like municipal land use authority is under siege. And that's because, in a way, it is. Let's be honest about that. But that's not just a Utah phenomenon. I'm sharing this article. It's from a year or so ago, but this is what happened in the Florida legislature. And I know the director of the Florida League and chatted with her about this. I could find you headlines from Florida to California, from Massachusetts to Arizona, of bills that are trying to undermine local authority in a variety of ways. Some of this comes from national organizations like ALEC. Some of it comes from national organizations like the National Association of Home Builders and others that are pushing efforts in multiple states. In fact, Victoria just texted me. The HB 98 concept started with ALEC and actually started in North Carolina and Arkansas, and passed in a really wide spread, or it passed a very wide form in both of those states. And those directors have told me how frustrating it is for their local members. So we've been trying as league directors to use NLC to try to help coordinate our efforts, still trying to get that effort off the ground. But in the meantime, I suppose there's misery. Misery loves company. The reason I share this particular article is that this particular article deals with inclusionary zoning. And if you have a subscription to the Miami Herald and read this whole article, you'll see how the Speaker of the House in Florida has actually articulated that his top priority is to get rid of all local regulations around land use and housing, and has been in a tug of war with their local league. So with that as a background, next slide, let's talk about what's being considered this very minute over at the Commission on Housing Affordability. The Commission on Housing Affordability is now in year 3 of its existence. And the co-chairs are Senator Jake Andrig and now Representative Steve Waldrop, who took Representative Val Potter's spot after Val Potter lost his re-election campaign. And then Representative Joel Briscoe is the other legislator. It consists of experts from across the housing sector, and it also includes 3 municipal representatives, one on behalf of the RDA Association, Matt Dahl of Midvale, Chris Condi, council member from Lehigh, and Andrew Johnston, council member of Salt Lake City, are both the league designees. We met with that group this morning and have been reviewing SB 164 with all the different stakeholders over the last few days. There are some positive components to the bill that you can see I've highlighted in the top corner. Then I've listed what we're calling the to be determined. And the reason they're to be determined is because the policy concept may make sense, though some clarification is necessary. For example, there's language in the bill that seems to facilitate the ability of cities to grant real property for the development of affordable housing, but the amount of time for the deed restriction and the percentage of AMI that would be required there need to be clarified. There's a proposal in there that from a policy perspective makes a lot of sense, that talks about state economic development incentives, also including some sort of community housing plan. Conceptually, that makes sense. The wording needs to be improved, and that piece actually is going to be a major point of emphasis for the new Economic Development Commission that is not yet in bill form, but will be, and that will be the effort by the legislature, the governor's office, and local governments to better align the state's economic development incentives and strategy. There is language in there that we advised you about previously, that the SB 34 menu items could expand from 3 to 4 or 4 to 5 if you have transit. And there's language in there about RDA expansion. There's been discussion about requiring an inventory of public assets for all governmental entities in the state. So all of those components are in the to be determined. From a staff perspective, we think that everything that's in italics on the screen and that's currently in the bill is worth further consideration in addition to the positive components. Because that bill is being debated right now in the commission, and the commission has not yet endorsed the bill, we anticipate, the chairs have told us, that there'll be a substitute. So we're not looking for an official position from you today, because we know there will be a substitute that will have some of these concepts and maybe even other concepts that come up. We wanted to give you an overview of what is in there as of this minute. The troubling components are twofold. First, there's language that would make it almost impossible for a city or a county to do inclusionary zoning. And inclusionary zoning is the concept where a city or a county requires that a portion of a new development be targeted to certain incomes. Usually in the state of Utah, those take the form of density bonuses or other agreed upon incentives. And we're concerned that the language that's currently in the bill would make inclusionary zoning difficult and also make it impossible for cities to have housing mitigation funds, which is one of the few tools that cities have to preserve existing low-income housing. I testified about this component about an hour ago now, or maybe 40 minutes ago. The second concerning piece is on fees. This would change the standard for certain types of development fees from reasonable to estimated actual, and would change the collection process and require that you submit those reports from this change process to the Office of the State Auditor. I also testified in opposition to this component. So my main takeaway to the commission in my brief testimony earlier was that 1 and 2 could actually of hurt cities with no link to housing affordability or to affordable housing. So again, the debate is going on right now at the commission. I don't see any questions in the chat box yet, but the position that we're looking for from the LPC is essentially general support and general opposition to the direction here. So Gary Hill asked for these recommendations of the task force. And interestingly, Gary, the stuff that's in the positive components, that's come before the commission before. Most of what else is there, the TBD and the concerning, they came up in concept, but the first time the commission is seeing language is right now. Again, none of it is new per se, because it's been brought up at meetings at a high level, but the first time they've seen language is right now. And there are multiple commission members, both the city reps as well as some of the other commission members, who are very concerned about some of the policy proposals having very little time for vetting. So stay tuned on this one. Again, we'll have more info in nightly emails starting tonight once the commission is done. Are there any questions about these pieces? I'm not seeing any. Yeah, interestingly, so we have a couple of comments, one from Paul Larson up in Brigham City asking if inclusionary zoning could be removed from the menu of policy choices, because cities may have selected that via the SB 34, but then this new definition could undermine that. Paul, it's a great point. We are expecting that the commission is going to debate quite a bit about the inclusionary zoning and the housing fund language. Developers feel very strongly about it. A lot of the low-income housing advocates are very concerned. And then in addition to my comments, Salt Lake City also testified prior to the deliberation in the commission with concerns about what this would do to their housing fund. And we think it could have impacts on what multiple cities from Ogden to Park City have tried to do. On the, let's see, Bernie House asked, concerned that the concerning components will do away with the good stuff in the bill. And that, yeah, that's a great point, is you don't want the bill to collapse. You want the consensus items and the good items to move forward and not get bogged down with these more controversial pieces. And then Chris Porter, the expansion of the set aside looking like, yeah, so the thought process that the thought process on the set aside would be that you could spend RDA housing money for things that are not housing per se, but were amenities to support housing. From a staff perspective, we're very concerned about the appearance that while we are trying to demonstrate to the legislature that cities are partners in the housing front, to then either eliminate tools that cities can use for housing, or in that RDA set aside potentially dilute a tool that cities can use for housing. Okay, let's see. Okay, yeah, somebody asked about appropriations. There are a couple of appropriation requests that would also be very beneficial for the Aline Walker Housing Fund. So when I referenced the limited gap funding, that's what I was referencing, is the appropriation. Interestingly, this is the third year. The first year was the SB 34 year that came from the commission. It was a consensus bill, even though the legislature didn't fund it. The second year, the legislature funded 50% of the request. And then you've got some money here, both for the pilot program and for the limited gap funding. But again, a lot of moving parts on this one. Any other comments before we jump to House Bill 82? Owen, down in the Springs, it's the school districts. Some school districts will not like the ability for RDA funds to be spent on housing or to support housing, leaving the district not wanting to participate in project areas. Yes, this has been the topic of conversation for the last couple of years of school district participation in RDAs, particularly school district participation in RDAs around transit, and this push and pull about how housing fits into those projects. So yep, that's a major issue. The inclusion of trails, yeah, Craig. So that would be, I think the language you're referencing is part of that potential set aside which I think has some problematic politics to it this year. Okay, let's move on. Speaking of problematic bills. Okay, if you have any questions about 164, I will quickly type, or I'll let somebody type my email address into the box, and that meeting goes until 2. So we'll find out how the commission meeting went and adopt accordingly. Okay, House Bill 82 is in committee this afternoon, and there is now a third sub that came out about 45 minutes ago. And so you can see this slide is from last week about the first sub and the second sub. So you can move on to the next slide, because now we're past these 2 subs. You as LPC authorized this negotiating team that since last Monday has met 3 times. And we actually have put together 3 different draft proposals that we took to Representative Ward and to other stakeholders. So you can go to the next one, trying to meet the key objectives that LPC set out last week. So the third proposal that we made is what we are calling ULCT 3. Okay, so ULCT 3 really has 3 components to it. Excuse me. Component number 1 is zoning. So as you recall, and you'll see it on the other side, Representative Ward's proposal contemplates preempting zoning in every single or in every residential zone in every community in the state. We proposed, the negotiating team proposed that there would be a floor of 50%. So every community would have to allow at least 50% unless you were carved out from that and you were a low income community or a college town. Trying to get to the right definition, but basically if you're a community that has a lot of of low income rentals, we were trying to say, why should there be additional rentals that the state is now requiring within your community? But like I said, the definition of trying to figure that out has been a little complicated. College towns, it's the same idea, that college towns already have a plethora of rental housing, so why should the state step in and mandate even more rental housing? Then we had a hammer that if a city, which we'll call Noville, and Chris, it was 50% of the zone types rather than, so he asked the question, 50% of the city or 50% of the residential zones, and we were contemplating the zones. If you don't act by October 1st, then the overall preemption would come into effect. We also proposed a variety of standards building off of Representative Dunnigan's substitute bill. And you can see what is highlighted in red is what Representative Ward is willing to consider, much of which actually appears in the substitute bill that just appeared a few minutes ago. The one that is not listed there is the infrastructure at 75%. And actually, I can't change it, but we should before we send the link out. This one in red of may deny ADU for lots under 6,000 square feet, that is only if we agree to change our position. So he's willing to go there, but only if we agree. So ULCT 3 had those standards, and then ULCT 3 also contemplated 2 new enforcement mechanisms. Those enforcement mechanisms were a property tax lien that you could use to ensure that an internal ADU, owner-occupied internal ADU, is complying with zoning and standards. And then the other one dealt with providing cities the option to use websites like Airbnb to enforce that owner-occupied internal ADUs are being used for full-time residents rather than vacation rentals. So this was our concept. We have taken this to the governor. We've taken this to multiple legislators to try to get a sense of how much support there would be for ULCT 3. Let's see, Jamie Davidson asked, would the ULCT 3 limit the number of unrelated occupants in the unit? Our proposal did not change the numbers that Representative Ward has in his bill. So his bill still has the 3 and the 4 for individuals living in the unit that would be classified as a single family. He was deleting the term unrelated, but we had insisted the caps stay the same. When we asked the Municipal Attorneys Association about the term unrelated, the answers were all over the map. And ultimately, there was no real consensus about whether the term should stay in or stay out. The bigger concern was the numbers of 3 and 4, and those are still in our proposal as well as in Representative Ward's response. Let me pause, see if there are any other questions I missed. So Bill from Riverdale said, I find the enforcement piece problematic. It makes the city the bad guy and doesn't offer revenue for the increased expenses. So the property tax lien would have some revenue attached to it. The short-term rentals piece, I suppose you would be the bad guy, but it would be an enforcement mechanism, particularly in gateway communities and those who are struggling with preserving your neighborhoods from turning into short-term rentals and vacation rentals. It would be a valuable tool. So again, on the other side, you can see that Representative Ward's counter proposal, which is now in his third substitute, would still have the zoning preemption, though we were going back and forth over whether or not he would be willing to consider some sort of buffer. That was his offer to us. We've told him that a buffer doesn't actually help the college towns. Provo and others have said, we're not interested in buffer. We're concerned about the campus creep throughout the city. Most of the standards are in his third sub, but there are still others that he's willing to put in, including the enforcement piece, if we change our position. Okay, next. Okay, so this again tries to spell out what is left. The zoning piece, on the standards, he's willing to grant most of our requests except for the sewer water infrastructure, and then enforcement if we drop our opposition to the bill. So before I kind of get to the next steps of our options, are there any final questions on the negotiations and the policy disputes back and forth? Okay, so I've got a question from Councilmember Rogers about how this works with water shares. So part of the reason we had put in language about the water sewer infrastructure was to try to get to water shares. Our language was admittedly imprecise there. He, like I said, at this point is unwilling to go there. Councilmember Simmons asked if we have any insight into that. I think this is both Representative Ward and House leadership who feel like that is not a real concern. Let's see. So Bill, yeah, we'll all be left with additional burdens on infrastructure, police, fire, EMS, and other enforcement. So yes, if every single family house turned into a single family house with an internal ADU and people use them as internal ADUs, yes, there would be an impact on additional 911 calls and on infrastructure. And we have raised that point repeatedly. And thus far, that has fallen on deaf ears. That's why we were pushing for the 50%. Ken from North Salt Lake, yes, our proposal was that cities could require a permit for an internal ADU to ensure compliance and require a business license as well. Yeah, so Provo Councilmember Shannon Ellsworth, who's on our negotiating team, says, I get it. I've talked to Representative Ward. He doesn't understand capital improvements, planning, or enforcement. So we're pushing on the legislature. Yes, Bill, it's been incredibly frustrating for us as well. And so, Councilmember Simmons, yeah, for an existing house that has insufficient water and sewer lines, that's why we were saying that the city should be able to say no. Mayor Bierman from Park City said we currently have over 2,000 unlicensed short-term rentals. Even with specific tools to enforce, ADUs will be abused. 30 days is too short as well. Councilmember Fowler from Salt Lake said we need impact fees and need to expand the scope as to what impact fees can be used for the increased calls of emergency police. Yeah, this has been a priority for a while to try to expand the scope of impact fees. Obviously, that's not part of this bill, but you're right. That is a major gap in the current impact fees code. I'm taking a breath, see if any other questions come in before we go to the next slide. Okay, let's advance to the next slide and talk about the options that we have right now. So the headline that I pulled out there is from the Deseret News. The league took our officers, Victoria and I took our officers to meet with both the Deseret News editorial board and the Salt Lake Tribune editorial board a few weeks ago. Despite that outreach and trying to complete the narrative, we continue to see columns from the Deseret News editorial board criticizing cities, particularly around ADUs. The committee hearings this afternoon, our read on the Senate is that they're mixed. We do have some key legislators that are willing to support ULCT 3. Now, let me make sure everybody hears me correctly here. ULCT 3 is the counter proposal that we made. Representative Ward now has a third sub, which encompasses some but not all of ULCT 3. So they are two different things here. When we were building the slides, the third sub was not yet out. So at this point, the governor has been unwilling to engage. The league officers and I have been meeting with his senior staff every week, pushing on this bill. And the response has been cities need to do more around housing. We'll be meeting with their team again tomorrow morning to push for support for a middle ground approach. And then, as was brought up last time, there are outside organizations like the realtors and others that have been lobbying both league members as well as state legislators to support the bill and to undermine the league position. We've been trying to keep everybody together as we've been trying to thread the needle. It's also important to recognize what else is out there. We've talked about House Bill 98, Billboard's bills, and 164. I should have put, but I neglected to, House Bill 273, which is Representative Val Peterson's ADU bill, which actually would specifically preclude impact fees from being part of the internal accessory dwelling unit conversation. He told me when I met with him a few days ago, and he's in House leadership, that he will push his bill if we don't get to yes on Ward's bill. So the impact fee language in his bill could be used as leverage. So I want to make sure everybody's clear about it, all the pieces on the chessboard here before we jump into it. And Ken from North Salt Lake makes a great point. Representative Ward's third sub gets close to the city ADU ordinance, except for the zoning preemption, because and that, as we put together ULCT 3 and took it to him, your feedback in the survey last week was very, very helpful. We had over 60 responses, and many of you provided great feedback, and we were able to follow up with specific ordinances to get a sense of what mattered as we built ULCT 1, 2, and 3 last week. So thank you very much for participating in that survey. So here are the options. Option number 1 is Representative Ward's counter proposal, which is the third sub. We go neutral on it as it is, which would mean swallowing that zoning preemption. Okay, that's option number 1. Option number 2 is that the LPC takes an official position of neutral on ULCT 3. So that was the counter proposal I laid out to you that had the two-step approach on the zoning preemption, and then authorize staff and the AD group to keep working to try to bridge the gap between Representative Ward's third sub and ULCT 3 on the zoning and infrastructure pieces, because those are the two pieces that are left. And then the third option would be to essentially stop the dialogue with Representative Ward and try to substitute ULCT 3 onto the House floor into the Senate. We do have some key legislators that have expressed support, and this is the calculation of political capital, likelihood of success, and league principles, and trying to balance all of those pieces. And if we go that route, then everyone's got to be all in. And when I say all in, it's got to be a top priority for every city in order to have potential for success there. What we've heard from different cities over the last few days is that if we got enough of ULCT 3, that people could live with it, and it may not be worth the long drawn out fight. Recognizing, particularly for college towns and for those unique communities that already have some really unique housing stresses, that there needs to be some movement on the zoning piece there, so that those communities don't get overwhelmed by this bill. I'll take another breath to see if there's any feedback or thoughts on these three options And then the ADU subgroup, met again this morning, and I'll defer to the leaders of the ADU subgroup as well if they want to chime in. Oh, I've got comments. Exciting. Okay. Isaac and P-Town, I move we continue to push you. Oh, that's okay. That's not for me. That's for you, Mayor Ramsey. And then, but I will answer Sean's question. Sean from St. George says, we agree with Park City, Moab, and Salt Lake, the short-term rentals are taken away from affordable ADUs because they're more profitable. So therefore, we need repeal of any prohibition statute to be able to use the advertising of the owner-occupied illegal short-term rentals. They can be used for affordable housing instead. Victoria, I need to take this call about this bill. So I'll turn it over to you to keep answering questions and look for a motion, and maybe even just hold the motion long enough for me to get back.
Okay, thanks, Cam. So let me see. Janine says, I would definitely encourage ULCT 3. University towns are still a serious issue. And yes, we have talked a lot, and some of your cities have done a really good job reaching out to Representative Board and your legislators to help them understand the university issue. We think he's starting to come around a little bit on that. Let's see. Ken Leatham, I believe the fighting this makes us look like we're fighting affordable housing. These units are happening already. The sub 3 looks close to what we are after. And that has been, Ken, you bring up a good point, that has been a difficult narrative to walk. We testified in committee that we are not opposed to ADUs, that many of our cities have adopted ordinances lately on them. But there is still a sentiment of the legislature that cities are being obstinate and being in the way, and you're seeing that played out in the news as well. So we're trying to get that message across and find that fine line that we can walk. Linda Greenwood, I bet that a study would show that short-term rentals impact affordable housing far more than any other issue. And this echoes Sean's point. And the short-term rentals were a hot item a few years ago with Representative Notwell. He's no longer in the legislature, so there may be some opportunity this year, especially in this narrative of affordable housing, to address that statute. And then another comment from James Davison that college and university towns piece is a big deal. I don't know if anyone from the working group has any comments to make. Let's see. And then Shannon says, it doesn't matter what we do, the Realtors Association is going to make us out to be the bad guys in anti-affordability. And we should note that there has been a lot of money from their PAC being put into this bill. They see this as an opportunity. And we've pointed out that if cities have to allow internal ADUs, particularly in new construction, this is a new amenity that can be added to homes, which would just increase the price of the home on resale. All right, let's see. And then Mayor Bierman in Park City, we should not agree to any version of this bill without repealing short-term rentals monitoring restrictions. And that has been a key negotiating tool that we've been using in these discussions. So, all right, let's see. I think we have a hand raised from one of the members of the working group and one of our ULCT officials, Mayor Silvestrini. So Carson, maybe if you could let Mayor Silvestrini speak particularly to this, since he's been on this small negotiating group.
Yeah, thank you. Can you guys hear me? I can't see anybody, but.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, our working group has been meeting on this, and we met for an hour and a half on it this morning. And for the other members that are on there, we have representatives from college towns and from cities that have ADU ordinances and cities that don't. It's a pretty broad representation. And our concern on this is just reading the tea leaves that if we don't adopt a neutral position on something, that we're going to get rolled on this. Basically, we could suffer a total preemption of our authority without the things that Representative Ward is offering to us that at least satisfy or mollify some of this with respect to being able to do some inspections, require owner occupation, require an additional parking spot, and preserve some ability for some impact fees. So I guess our recommendation is really number 2 here, that we adopt an official position of neutral on ULCT 3 option. We obviously would all love to stick to our guns and to try to argue for the substitute bill and do a floor fight, but we think we'd lose that in the House. And we think that if we don't at least show that we're willing to play ball by going neutral on number 2, that we won't have as much clout in the Senate. It's, our strategy really is kind of like do the best we can in the House and then try to fight this in the Senate where it may be a little more favorable to us. But anyway, that was the sense of our whole group. And we got, towns like St. George and Provo behind us on this, and Provo has a big college town concern about this and a high percentage of rentals already. So anyway, I'm prepared to make a motion on that, and that's the reason for it. And I'm, maybe, when Cameron comes back, he can explain this more. The people that were on that call are Mayor Caldwell this morning, Mayor Ramsey, and I don't know if you guys want to speak to this if you're on, but that's the deal. And I'm prepared to make a motion on it unless there's a big controversy about it. Thanks.
I appreciate that, Mayor Silvestrini. So I just have a question, if I can, for Victoria. Exactly, I appreciate Mayor Silvestrini reflecting what we spent a great deal of time as a variety of cities going over and trying to come up with today, as we try to determine really what's best for all of us, knowing that this is going to pass. This is going to pass. And really the opinion that was given this morning was, if we can get to neutral on ULCT 3, we stand to come out better than really any of our other options. Because if we come back and say, no, we're still going to oppose, a very real option is to have this revert back to the original bill, which was much worse, right? Without any of the concessions.
Yeah, so, and I'm seeing in the chat, the concerns about violating our pillars. And this is just where we're having to make some tough political calls. As a reminder, Representative Val Peterson, who is in House leadership, also has an EDU bill, which would prohibit cities from collecting impact fees and be a complete preemption. Trying to read the political tea leaves, which is not an accurate science. If we oppose Representative Ward's bill and can't give some of what they are looking for, we would expect Representative Ward to potentially take out all of the guardrails in his bill, still leave the preemption in, potentially not give us any of the enforcement tools, and add the impact fees piece from Representative Peterson's bill into his bill. That passed the House, in which case we are then working through the Senate. Now we do have, and it's not a non-option to try and fight this in the Senate. We've heard some from senators who are concerned about the overreach, particularly those who represent university towns. I know Provo has talked a lot to their senators and may be able to help us, but we would then potentially be trying to negotiate back on things that are not currently in Representative Ward's bill, but would be added by the House. The House leadership feels quite strongly about this issue, and our concern is we're trying to figure out the best political step forward and trying to balance, our policy prisms and our policy pillars to weigh that local preemption with the politics that we're seeing play out. It will be, there's no way we can defeat an ADU bill. There will be an ADU bill this session. It's a question of how much we're willing to put a fight up in the House. There's been a lot of rhetoric about cities not being willing to come to the negotiating table and be obstructive to affordable housing. So how much we're willing to fight that fight in the House versus trying to find something that maybe we can live with that is a preemption, but maybe not as great of a preemption as the House leadership has been trying to push forward, or will if they see us as not negotiating in good faith.
Victoria, this is Shannon Ellsworth in Provo City. I'll just second Mayor Silvestrini's motion. Provo has a lot of code enforcement struggles. We're a college town, so we have 60% rentals. Where we are today, a lot of towns are going to be very soon if this bill is bigger and if it's uglier. So we think that this neutral position is the best way to go right now. It doesn't keep any city from lobbying their legislator and saying, hey, we need something else for college towns, or we need to change the rules on short-term rentals. You should keep doing that. And I think that's why I'm comfortable today with neutral, is because you might be able to support it, you might not, but you can lobby your legislator either way. So this doesn't keep us from opposing it as individual cities, but it does give the league a position to say, hey, we are working with the legislators, we are negotiating, we are compromising, and there's still room for compromise.
Hey, Victoria, this is Kate Bradshaw. I wanted to chime in also from the work group perspective. First of all, I'm sorry to the rest of the cities that our Bountiful legislator has proposed this bill and put this forward, despite our best efforts as a city to have a robust ADU ordinance. I think what Mayor Silvestrini and Shannon have said is really accurate about our efforts to try and come up with real solutions as a work group. And we felt as a group that Plan 3 from the league was a good plan, was a great compromise to offer. And so I would really echo that if we can hold strong on, if we can get to ULTC 3, that is a good spot to be to. If Representative Ward in the House cannot meet us there, then it obviously leaves us some options still to play out in the Senate. There are, a lot of bills attacking cities that are out there this year, and those will be additional clubs used to beat up on us. Besides just this bill, there obviously are billboard bills and building inspector bills and other things as well. So, and just for fun, if you're all welcome to listen into our Bountiful City Council meeting Tuesday night, where we have invited Representative Ward to come attend and talk with us further from just a Bountiful perspective. As Gary Hill likes to say, you'll take our 5 Zoom viewers to 6 or 7.
All right, thank you, Kate. I will try and tune in. I need some time where I'm watching someone else take the heat, so that I'll do that. So I've asked Carson to go back to the slide that Cam put up showing ULCT 3 and Representative Ward's reply. So on the right, you can see where Representative Ward is drawing a line in the sand on zoning preemption, but he might consider a half-mile buffer around college towns, and we think we can maybe work with him more to change that half-mile to something else that makes a little more sense. He is willing to put in standards, which you'll see over there on the left, if ULCT will change our position. And when we're talking about changing position, we're not necessarily talking about support, we're talking about neutral. And he's willing to agree to most of our standard requests except infrastructure sufficiency. And then he is also willing to accept those enforcement tools we've asked for if we change our position. And then on the left, you'll see our ULCT 3 proposition. Again, instead of the full preemption, we're asking for the 50% of residential zones for SB 34 cities. And if you're a unique city, which would be a college town or university or lots of low-income rentals, you would only have to allow ADUs in 25% of your residential zones. If you do not, then by October 1st, 100% of your zones would be eligible for internal ADUs. And then you can see the standards there that we've been discussing with him. Although it sounded like Cam wanted to point out the second bullet on 6,000 square foot lots. I can't remember what he said, but it sounded like Representative Ward maybe was not willing to entertain that. Carson or Wayne, if you caught what Cam said, that I think that changed differently from when he made this slide. and then the enforcement mechanisms. So that, hopefully that will help you see what ULCT 3 is. And then we're still trying to find some space if they're not willing to accept that with Representative Ward and House leadership. And I think Cam is still on the phone. I know people, it would be great to have him back on, but I know people have to move on to other things. So Mayor Ramsey, I don't know. I know that Mayor Silverstream put up a motion. Let me see if there are any other chats I can answer real quickly.
I guess I have a question because I've been supportive of the motion of going neutral on ULCT 3 and having staff continue negotiations until you just pointed out the 6,000 square foot lot thing. And you know that at least a lot of places have concerns, but in South Jordan, as we think about Daybreak as a master plan community, if he's unwilling to even consider that that might not be the best place for unlimited ADUs with what's already there, I'd like to know that.
Let me try and text Cam while he's on the phone.
Thank you.
And maybe the best thing would be to go on to the next slide, the next item. Oh, there's Cam. And if he can't join us right now.
Yep, I've been following the chat box, but sorry, that was not Representative Ward, but that was one of our champions who's been helping us negotiate with Representative Ward, providing some additional updates. So as we mentioned, the third sub has come out, and even though 6,000 lots is not yet in there, college town language is not yet in there, there is a willingness from Representative Ward to address both of them, and both the small lots and then doing something for college towns, but there's no clarity on what that something is yet. So that's why I needed to take that call, and I apologize.
Cameron, is that only if we go neutral on his bill or if we go neutral on our ULCT 3?
It would be neutral on his bill, which would be moving it closer to ULCT 3. In the call I just had, I told this legislator that our members were still very concerned about the overall zoning preemption, concerned on the low-income community side, and concerned on infrastructure, and actually read him multiple comments from the chat box. And he said, yep, I get it. I'm with you on the policy. I'm just relaying to you the politics, and Representative Ward's been trying to get as many supporters as possible this morning that were in our camp, or at least favorable to our position.
Okay, so can I ask if what the opinion would be of the political fallout or going forward? I believe the bill, or the motion, excuse me, that's on the table is to take a position of neutral on ULCT 3. And there's not a motion at this point on taking a position on Representative Ward's third substitute bill. Do you feel like that's what we discussed, as has been said at length this morning, but we didn't have the third substitute? Is it your professional opinion that the third substitute goes far enough that a position of neutral is going to get us the closest? Is a position of neutral on our ULCT 3 enough to help us get to the finish line that collectively as a state, as cities, that we would all like to get as close to as we can?
So I think as I'm scanning the comments, I want to acknowledge a few key points here. One, the governor and legislative leadership, well, let me back up. House leadership is obviously very strongly supportive of this bill. And we've been concerned from day one about what else could be brought as leverage on this bill. And that's why we made the decision to try to negotiate and thread the needle, because we didn't see a path to victory to essentially blow up the bill. That's our staff perspective, whether you agree or disagree. We have been pushing the governor to help try to find the middle ground on this bill that has been unsuccessful thus far. And when I say we, it's, the league officers and the like. With ULCT 3, all of Representative Ward's third substitute comes from ULCT 3 with those key gaps that we referenced a couple of slides ago, so that we would still need to negotiate. And based on the call I just had, he's willing to talk more about the college towns piece. What that looks like, I don't know, because I didn't talk to him specifically. So that's where option 2 allows you as the policy committee to say, we're neutral on this framework of 3. We don't like it, we're not supportive of it, but we're neutral on it, so that we know where the lines are, and then we continue negotiating on the pieces that are not yet in the third sub around zoning and infrastructure. The other option with option 3 would be more draconian. Maybe we win, maybe we lose, but certainly we could have some fun storming the castle. So those are kind of my 2 cents on it.
Well, that's
So
what I was
some- the
wondering.
board
I
mem-
just wanted to clarify that you felt like the if we take a position of neutral on ULCT 3, that still allows the leverage to move forward with the remaining negotiations that we all would like to see take place.
Yes, because ULCT 3 does not have the full-scale preemption, and it has infrastructure language, so we will continue to negotiate on those pieces and see if we can get to yes, because then ULCT 3 is simply our internal proposal, and making sure we're all on board with that. And then if we come back, we may be in a situation where we have the third sub, and then Representative Ward offers 1 or 2 more additional pieces, and then we'll need to decide, has this moved the needle enough to be consistent with option number 2? That's where we will do our best to continue to use the ADU group to make sure we know exactly what the most important pieces are and how to get there.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to ask for a vote. We have a motion by Mayor Silvestrini of Mill Creek to take a position of neutral on our ULCT 3. And we have a second from Shannon Ellsworth, I think, from Provo, right? So that being said, all those who are registered to vote, please go back to where Carson has he left the link. He asked you to leave a window open. If you can get back to that, please vote either yes to support the motion of going neutral or no. And then if you can't access that and you're a voting member and for some reason you can't get in, you can go ahead and let us know in the chat. Thank you.
Roger, you're the official keeper of records here, but that's looking to me like we've crossed the 60% threshold. We can give folks another minute or 2 to cast their votes, though.
How many votes do we have in?
We have 80 out of 94.
Let's leave it open for 30 seconds.
I wish we had a Jeopardy song to play while we had open voting.
Okay, I think they're there.
Okay, I am closing voting.
Okay, thank you. I just was reading through everything that came through in the chat as well. Okay, we have a very strong majority voting to take our position on our ULCT 3 proposals to neutral. And with that comes instruction and a request of staff to please continue to work with Representative Ward so that his third substitute can reflect what we have in ULCT 3. And I appreciate, we knew
Right.
this.
So Mayor Ramsey, can I just add one thing? Because there have been a couple of questions about how that motion deals with the third sub, because they're two different things.
Right.
So the way we will approach it in committee today is say the third sub has moved the needle considerably and has closed the gap between Representative Ward and where the league is. And there are a couple of issues around zoning and infrastructure. And if we can close that gap further and get to a place that's consistent with ULCT 3, then we would be neutral. Okay, so that's why the motion you just did of ULCT 3 is the framework with the flexibility on zoning and infrastructure. You know, that's what we'll talk about with committee members and Representative Ward. If we can bridge that gap a little bit further, then you've authorized us to make the call with the ADU subgroup to go neutral if we can bridge that gap a little bit more.
If I may, I just want to say thank you. None of us like this. We don't like this. That's a given, right? It doesn't matter where we live. None of us like this. However, we have reached a point in the negotiations where at this point, it appears that Representative Ward is more open to anything that we've heard so far out of what's been proposed. That's been a great deal of work on the part of a lot of people. Thank you for that. It feels almost miraculous to be at the point we're at, even though we're far from where we want to be. And I appreciate the recognition that this is requiring some painful concessions, but the outcome has the best potential with what we're doing right now. And I think we've understood that the best hope we have for the best outcome possible, the least damaging to cities, is doing what we're doing right now. For that, thank you to all of you. Appreciate that.
Okay, so we can, these were the proposed ADU talking points depending on kind of where the motion went. So if we'd gone for number 3, we'd be going the full court blitz here. We still may need to do a full court blitz, but you know, it's going to pass out of committee today regardless of our position. And so we'll come back to these in a nightly email, so stay tuned.
Can I add one more thought just to plant this seed in the hearts and minds of everybody on this call? One thing that the governor's office did recommend to us in our meeting last week, which has been challenging because they don't have a statewide organization, but HOAs, there's a lot of HOAs that are probably not going to love this bill. And if they could weigh in, so if you have HOAs in your community that would care about this bill and want to contact your legislators with their opinion of it, they wouldn't be able to prohibit ADUs as an HOA if this bill passes. And so if you have HOAs that have a thought about it, feel free to reach out to them and encourage them to reach out to your legislators as well. That was a recommendation that we really can't help champion as an organization because they don't have an organization, but that's something that we each could do individually in our own cities if we wanted to. Just a thought. Okay, Cam, take it away.
Okay, next. Phew, it is 1:46. So this has been a terrific conversation. So thank you, everybody. Let's see how fast we can do this so we can be done by 2. So next slide.
Sorry, internet issues. It's loading momentarily.
So John, I think you and I are tag teaming a lot of these, and then we have a Roger bill. So let's see how fast we can go. So John, take it away.
Yeah, Senate Bill 155 is Senator Thatcher's bill that we talked last time about, the 988 suicide prevention line. Just so you know, as we mentioned last week, you know, starting the 1st of January, if someone dials 988, it goes somewhere. And so something needs to be done. Under Senator Thatcher's bill, I think his heart's in the right place, but there's some real issues, I think. He wants to, first of all, He wants to create a suicide prevention and crisis service account and have the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health handle that. He's also asking for a lot of money. We've heard that I think it's $1 on each phone account to be able to get there, which is millions and millions of dollars a year. And then he sets out his funding prioritization. Carson, is there another slide on this? I think. Yeah, one of the problem we have, and LELC has with this, is it doesn't take into consideration the fact that we have to mesh together our 911 calls and our 988 calls. Don't get me wrong, you know, right now those calls would go to an NCOT team up at the University of Utah. They do a wonderful job, but we think that number one, we believe that we need to work together with the 911 system. We think that perhaps the best way to approach that right now is just put a group together, a task force that's made up with all the stakeholders and make that all happen. Part of the problem with $1 a month on your phone bill, we think first of all that's excessive, and secondly is part of the money right now on your phone bill that goes to 911 services is for equipment in our local jurisdictions. That has a sunset, I think, of a couple more years, and we'll still have the need for equipment. And so we think that that'll be harder to get if that's on there. And but really the main thing we think that needs to happen is and we're working with some legislators just to put together a task group to be able to address these issues. And right now we think the Senate Bill 155 just goes too far. And I don't know, Sean Guzman's I think's on the call. I don't know if you can let him talk, Carson. But Sean, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, we are very close to getting a bill that will be under Senator Thatcher's 155, but we'll modify it to create a task force. And that'll give us time in the interim to take a look at all of the stakeholders in this and put together legislation for next year that we think will work better for everyone involved and also be more cost efficient too. So at this point, under the current language of 155, we oppose it, and then we're watching it to see what comes out, how it's amended, and then we'll come back to the committee for our position then.
So our positions would still be to oppose. So that's, go ahead, next slide, Carson. The next bill is House Bill 142. This is actually already passed out of the House. This bill came to me through, actually through Andrew Gruber of WFRC. They pointed out, first of all, what this allows is a bicyclist comes to a stop sign. He doesn't have to come to a complete stop. He still has to slow to a reasonable speed, and he still has to yield to everything that would be there as if there was a stop sign. And as I talked with Andrew about this, the key point to me was that studies have shown when this is allowed, that it actually makes the intersection safer. As a bicyclist stop, I'm assuming with a bicyclist stop, they just kind of disappear from view, and people are more likely to turn into that. And Mayor Dirk Burton, who's also been talking back and forth with Andrew and I on emails, supports this. I think this is a good bill. And right now, it's to be determined. I'm recommending that we support it. That's it, Carson. Next.
So I'll try and be as,
oh, Wayne.
Yeah, I'll try and be as quick as possible. So SB 81 is kind of the state's annual kind of cleanup bill for medical cannabis. The current draft basically pushes back some dates that were in the bill for state requirements. We've asked the sponsor for a change to the legislation to help us with some of our employees in regards to their use of medical cannabis. So you can see that state code requires currently that if an employee of a political subdivision has a medical cannabis card, you have to treat them the same way that you would treat any other individual with a prescribed medication. The law does exclude employees that potentially could impact federal funding or require federal clearance because obviously it's still illegal at the federal level. Well, it's still illegal, but this could impact federal funding. Next slide. So the challenge is in speaking with medical professionals, attorneys, and looking at some of the national standards. For example, the National Fire Protection Association says that a firefighter that is using medical cannabis can only perform 2 of the 14 essential functions required to basically do their job. And so in speaking with some medical professionals, they say they would advise a city to not allow individuals actively using medical cannabis to perform the job of, say, a firefighter or a police officer. And so in talking with them, we said, well, could you have a window in which they don't use it for up to 12 hours before showing up to their shift? But THC potentially could stay within someone's system for up to 6 months, depending on how they metabolize it. And so they would not clear the individual with an active card and as well with a window after they stop using. So what we've asked Senator Vickers is to exclude in that provision that excludes federal employees that impact federal funding, to also add law enforcement, EMS, and 911 dispatchers. It's a very narrow language, so it'll just be impacting those jobs for employees at a political subdivision. He is going to include that in the bill, but it will be an uphill battle, and we will probably have to ask many of you to contact your legislators to support this change because advocates are not supportive of the exclusion. I'm so happy to answer any questions. Clint Smith says the Utah fire chiefs and police chiefs have sponsored to include a carve out for safety sensitive positions as described. Yeah, and so we have, thanks Clint, we have been working with some of the employee groups on this language as well. So our recommendation will be changed from neutral to support, and we'll vote on that at the end of the meeting. And any other questions, you can follow up with me after the meeting.
All right, take this one, Ken.
This is fast. There are lots of police bills this session. There were over 80 at one point. And this is an effort to recognize that these issues cannot all be discussed during the 2021 session. So this would create a 3-year Community and Police Relations Commission. We have advocated for ULCT to have one of the spots on that commission. Commissioner Anderson told me Friday that he was supportive of that request. And you can see the mission of all of the things that they are looking at, with one progress report scheduled in 2022 and final recommendations in 2024. So our recommendation is to support, particularly since we've advocated to make sure that the league has a spot. The Chiefs of Police Association will also have a spot. Interestingly, I just got a text. Hey, John, what was the discussion at LELC about House Bill 283?
I just barely sent you a text saying, you want me to report on LELC?
Yes,
LELC,
go ahead, because our recommendation came before the LELC.
Yeah, they met this morning and talked about it. And generally speaking, there's a little concern about, this work group is to recommend policy and is to recommend legislation in the future. And there's a little bit of concern about that, but their biggest concern for them was that out of the 20 or so people on the commission, only 4 of them are in law enforcement, and that includes the AG's office. And they would like a better representation, and they're gonna follow up and try to change that a little bit. And so their position was to hold it and discuss, but generally they understand the issue and are supportive other than that.
So in that case, Victoria, I'm changing it on the fly, but I wrote support in anticipation prior to LELC and figuring LELC was going to be supportive. So I think maybe we change this to TBD so it matches LELC, and then we can work on those amendments. This is part of the fun of trying to get stuff done in advance. Okay, we're actually going to hold this one, right, Wayne, because there are meetings scheduled in the next couple of days, and this could be changing. So we don't want to take a formal position yet on it.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, things are moving quickly. Victoria, 303.
So Representative Johnson had a bill last year that we opposed, changing how EMS was provided by municipalities. He's been working over the summer, putting together stakeholders, including with Representative Snyder, who also opposed his bill last year. Basically what this bill does is it says municipality, there is now official language and code saying the municipality has to provide an adequate level of 911 ambulance service. The Bureau of EMS would determine that minimum level. You can provide that, however, by contracting with a contiguous local government entity. It also says that as these contracts come up, the Department of Health can align the boundaries of the provider exclusive geographic service area with the boundaries of a political subdivision. And then it has language allowing municipalities to terminate 911 ambulance service provider contracts in certain circumstances with notice. So we're recommending a position of neutral, but if anyone has any concerns or feedback, please let us know.
Okay, we are losing voting members, so let's keep going quickly.
Okay, I'll do this really fast. Senator Harper's drastically changed this bill, which we were actively opposing. We had a great deal of influence. He's cut the amount of the exemption in half, restored the cliff. The cliff meant you lose the whole exemption once you get past the exemption level. $25,001, you go back to zero. That was 70% of the money. Where we are now is that the revenue hit to cities is between $300,000 and $600,000, where it went from about 4 to 5 million. School districts and the counties have essentially signed off on this bill. Our original position was to oppose. In some ways, I'm reluctant to change that only because I hate anything that has a revenue hit, but maybe we ought to change it to TBD. But if it stays opposition, I'm not going to speak against this anymore. This deal is done. And frankly, we're not going to influence it once the school districts and the counties made their decision. That's faster than I wanted it to be, but that's the situation.
Okay, Carson, advance. Okay. While it's thinking, we'll take one more minute and then we'll do the vote for the bills, Mayor Ramsey, since we're over time and we've got legislators we need staff to follow up with before 3:40 committee meeting. So the last two bills are just potential pilot projects for municipal voting. House Bill 75, which represents Stenquist, actually would empower cities at the expense of counties. So our recommendation was to support the concept, but work with the bill sponsor and the counties to see if there's a way to achieve the objective without having to fight with the counties. So we want to make you aware that this was out there. And then the next one is also a pilot program that's coming from Representative Robertson. It's a star voting method. Historically, the league has supported pilot projects when it comes to municipal voting. So the supports are consistent with our historic position, recognizing that the Stenquist one's a little more complicated because it could mean a fight with our fellow local governments. So with that, I'm done there. And Mayor Ramsey, normally we ask for feedback from folks, but in light of the fact we're losing people, I think we should wrap it up.
I think so too. Thank you so much. All right, we have a motion on the table from Mayor Burton to support all recommendations that have been made by staff, with a second by Dawn Shelton, second by Carrie Malkovich. So that being the case, please weigh in if you vote yes to the motion or no.
Mayor Ramsey?
Is it too late for a substitute motion if we're voting? We have a substitute motion I have to scroll back up. I think it was Gary Hill. To remove SB 65, but people are already voting. I don't know that we can do anything about that at this point.
So perhaps one option would be to keep the call open, and then if there was another motion to change after, we could have that discussion. Roger and Cam, I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
We're in the middle of a vote. Let's let this play out.
And a good point that Victoria just made, SB 65 is not on our list today.
Yeah, I
So
don't.
this is both for the list and for the overall ratification. So
Okay. Right.
Let's let this one go, then we can have another motion.
Okay, great. We will finish this up and then we will address that motion that we have from Sandy City.
So I'm not sure how many voting members we have off. I know we've lost about 60
Do
participants.
we even have a majority left?
We've had about 50.
yeah, so we do still have, Roger, we do still meet the quorum requirement.
Okay.
But in light of the fact that we've gone so long, my suggestion is we bring SB 65 back next week. Just in light of how many
As a
people
matter
have
of
left.
fairness, we've got
We've dropped 70 attendees just from when we started till now. So Evelyn and Gary, does that work? Make a motion to put that on the agenda for next week?
I think I would appreciate that because, let's see, we'll be in committee this week.
Well,
I'm happy to
I'll
stay
defer
and
to-
discuss it
I
if we
mean-
have enough people who can stay and discuss it.
So looks like we've had 64 votes. So I'm going to close the motion on the general staff recommendations, and then we can discuss 65, or we can discuss not to have 65. But I'm closing voting.
Okay, we have a strong majority to support the staff recommendations on these positions for today for these bills. And now, is Gary Hill a panelist? Is he able to speak? Yes, he is. Okay.
Yeah, so Mary Ramsey, just so you know, I've had a few texts from people who want to have, and then a couple of them in the chat box to have more voting members to discuss. So we do still have a quorum of voting members. So we, according to our bylaws, we can still continue the discussion and bring that motion. And so Councilmember Fowler, I know you have concerns about changing positions. So I think let's be ready to bring it up. And as long as we still have a quorum, we can proceed.
Okay. Well, I agree with that I would like to have more of our people here to represent. You know, Gary said they'll be in committee all week, and that's frustrating because they won't have any direction or discussion either. So Gary Hill, take it away. Let's.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the opportunity to speak very briefly. SB 65 is an RDA tool that would allow expiring RDAs to have a conversion of their tax rate from the RDA to identified to a specific tax rate for economic development within the city. I understand that Salt Lake City is opposed to it, and I've read their concerns, but in essence, the bill does this. It adds a tool for economic development for expiring RDAs. It does not take away from anything existing RDAs can do. And we've been asking the legislature for years for additional tools for economic development. For us to have one offered to us at the request of our economic development agencies and then to take no position on it is, I fear, a position that's going to hurt us in the future as well. Bountiful would really like to see this tool, and so I understand there's going to be discussion, but I would like to make a motion that we change our position from no position to support.
Okay, thank you. And I'm reading the chats as well. We have some seconds on that motion too, but if I go back up, I have to find what Evelyn Everton from Sandy, I can't remember what her motion was. And then I'm also going to give some time to Amy Fowler. Amy from Salt Lake City, you are a panelist now. Why don't you go ahead and tell us your thoughts?
Thank you. I appreciate that, Madam Chair. Amy Fowler, Council Chair of Salt Lake City. And I do want to say a couple of things regarding my concerns. First off, I think it's unfortunate that we're making such a huge policy shift as a league without more of our members present. We've been on a phone call for 2 hours or in a meeting for 2 hours and have lost a lot of our voting members that this is and could be a concern to. So I have a little bit of an issue with that, but happy to continue with some of Salt Lake City's concerns. As to the idea that this is a tool that we didn't have before, any RDA can, and any RDA agency can actually utilize this tool. We sort of already have it. And instead, I believe, and the city believes, that it takes away some of our other tools. For example, and I said this last time when I made my my motion to oppose this bill, is that it allows the county and the school districts to opt out of funding, yet reap the benefits from it. And so we're actually decreasing an RDA's ability to have a funding mechanism by which they could actually put forward towards economic development. And while we're doing that, the county and the school district can say, that's okay, we don't want to be a part of it, yet we're going to reap the benefits from it. It's also, I have an issue, and I think we've seen this throughout the league, that I have an issue, and somebody put this in the chat, if it doesn't work for your city, you don't have to use the tool. Yeah, I agree with that, other than what we have often seen as an option becomes a mandate. And then we are required to do something like this that actually has the potential of lowering our ability to go to put funds towards both affordable housing and economic development. Also very concerning is RDA, that as our RDA in Salt Lake City, and there is no percentage in this for affordable housing. And yet this is part of what RDA objectives are for. And so while we want to make sure that there's economic development, any RDA throughout the state can use their dollars for economic development with a portion set aside for affordable housing, so that we're simply not just gentrifying areas, but we're creating communities with our agencies. Yet this doesn't create any sort of mandate, if you will, for that affordable housing. RDAs can still put their money towards economic development. I also have a big concern that this bypasses processes that we already have in place. I could picture different boards being used instead of the city council. I know this has been scoffed at when other people have brought it up, but then you don't have an elected official, or you have the potential of not having any elected officials whose constituents' tax money is being spent toward this economic development, being spent on projects that they have no say in. I'm not saying that this isn't something that could have great potential. I just am concerned that we have not been able to get some of these answers about what happens in the future. The process, again, itself. So the RDA has this, and then it's highly likely that taxes will be raised without taxpayers ever having a say in that. as an elected official, that concerns me. And so at this point, I would say those are some of our concerns, and I'm happy to talk with others about and more in depth about these concerns, but I don't think that it's appropriate to change our vote to a support when some of these things just haven't been vetted out. This bill came to us last year and we raised these exact same concerns, and yet the bill hasn't changed at all. Nobody has addressed some of these concerns. What do we do with our constituents that don't want their taxes raised? And yet we're going to be the ones that are going to have to face that, potentially without any say. I think what I'm asking for is for us to say, let's just hold off and get some answers to some of the things that, again, we raised last year and nobody was willing to talk to us about. And with that, I'll concede.
Thank you. I appreciate the input and thank you for those thoughts. We have Evelyn Everton from Sandy who's going to speak as well. And then just to let everybody know, I've been toying back and forth with how's the best way to proceed as far as running the business of Utah League of Cities and Towns, regardless of the position that we feel, on this specific bill. And since I have an active motion on the table and a second, I will be taking a vote on this and we will make that decision. And then we can have this added to an agenda next week when we have the rest of our members here. And if the conversation, we can just make a determination at that point, whether the position we take this week is what we continue with next week or not. But at this point.
So Mayor Ramsey, can I just make a couple of quick clarifications? And I've got Representative Ward who's trying to get a hold of me for the bill that's in committee in an hour.
Yes.
So first, there were a couple of comments about whether there was a working group. I know that individual cities have met with the RDA Association, and so I don't know the extent of the communication between the folks in the RDA Association and others. So you do have a motion on the floor, and let me remind people that by our bylaws, we have support, opposed, neutral, and TBD. But when we have no position, it means we have a divided membership. And because of the vote on this bill a couple months ago, we currently have no position. So that's where we're at. So we would be changing from no position, which means we have the divided membership, to taking an active position. So I just want to make sure everybody's kind of clear on that. And Mayor Ramsey, looks like you've got a sub motion. Roger and Victoria, Representative Ward is calling me, so I need to step out to take care of ADU, so I'll let you guys.
Representative Ward, thank you. Please talk to Representative Ward. We'll hear from Evelyn, and then we're going to hear from Chris Wharton, and then we're going to end discussion there because it's 2:15, and we have a substitute motion to hold on this bill, so we will address that after we hear from the next two. So Evelyn, if you'd like to go, the time is yours.
I just really quickly, I don't want to take up a lot of time. I just think, once this bill passes, then that's the opportunity for every city to look at this tool and decide if it works for them or not. If it doesn't work for Salt Lake City, which it doesn't seem like it does, and they have their concerns and they're worried about having to meet as a council and decide whether or not they would want to look at the increment, then that's great. But I think just limiting that option for every city to see if this works isn't really what the league stands for. We are typically always fighting against the legislature, reducing our options or reducing our tools. And then again, like Gary Hill said, this is an instance where we will have an additional one. And as cities, we can all look at it and determine individually with our very unique communities, whether or not this works or not. So I just, in principle, don't understand why we would not support an additional tool for cities to use. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. Appreciate that. Okay, Chris.
I appreciate what the deputy mayor from Sandy is saying, but and that would be true if this tool wasn't a tool that diminishes the powers of the other tools. So if there's already a problem getting the county and school boards to participate, then why would we let them off the hook? Is essentially what this does, and it's going to create an issue where if some cities in the county use it and other cities don't, that's going to weaken the amount of investing partners that we have in these project areas, and ultimately is going to end up harming cities and our other tools. I also have a concern that this could potentially lead to the creation of a different taxing entity that would take the power away from city councils and put it in the hands of an unelected board. So, I'm not clear. I've spoken with some people from other cities. I'm not clear why other cities can't solve the problems that I've heard that have been raised under the existing law. It sounds to me like the existing law permits cities to do all of the things that I've heard so far that they're interested in doing under the existing law. So I don't think it's a good idea to add a tool to our toolbox that could just potentially destroy the other tools. And then I also would reiterate what my colleague Amy said about the process, that this is the potential for this is very widespread. There's a high potential for unintended consequences. And I'm concerned about changing positions under the circumstances that we have right now on something that could be so broad sweeping.
Okay, thank you for that. We have, let's see, Bev has asked clarification, is the motion on the table? I will restate that. The current motion that we have is it's a substitute motion. We had a motion to vote to support, and we had a substitute motion to hold on this. And I don't know if there's a second. I don't have a second on the substitute motion. If there's a second on the substitute motion, please make it now. Otherwise, that goes away and we will vote on the original motion, and we're going to do it quickly. All right, we have a second on the substitute motion. So all in favor of holding on taking a position on this? This is an important conversation. We want a lot of input in. Keep in mind, this will be in committee all week this week. And so that's just something to consider. If the sub passes, does the position remain neutral? I think the position remains, we have no position. Currently, we have taken no position, is my understanding. So there would be TBD. The substitute is to hold off and remain at no position. Yeah.
This motion only needs 50%.
And this is something that we can bring back and put on our agenda next week. It will be in committee this week. So just keep that in mind.
Seeing as we're pressed for time, we'll just give another few seconds. Looks like we've had 45 voting members cast votes here. I'm sorry, 49.
Okay, let's close it.
Wow. Okay. I think that's the closest I've ever seen a vote here before. Okay, so that being the case, with a vote of 49% voted yes to hold our position and 51% voted no, then we move to the original motion, which is to change our position from no position to a position of support. And I want to, again, include the caveat that we can put this on the agenda for next week and have additional discussion with the greater.
This motion requires 60% to pass.
60% to pass, and we'll have this conversation again next week. I think either way, we're going to have this conversation again next week. But that being the case, thanks to everybody who's hung in there with us, and please cast your vote. Okay, let's give this just like 10 more seconds.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Slow down. The voting is closing. It's just taking some time.
Okay, we have 73% of those voting, so we do. Roger, this stands, right? We're good. As far as this, what I'm looking at is the outcome at this point for the right now. 73% voted yes to move our position to one of support, 25% said no, and 2% abstained. That being the case, that will be our official position, and we will, I want to make sure that Salt Lake City knows we will put this on the agenda for next week and have additional discussion to this. Thank you to everyone who's weighed in and who stuck around and participated. And with that, I need a motion to adjourn. We do still have a quorum.
Yes, we do.
We do. All right, Tony Barker moves to adjourn. We have seconds. I'm not even going to take a vote. I'm just going to say thank you to all of you for hanging in there with us. This is important work and we appreciate your input, and we will see you all next week. Reach out to your legislators.
Thanks, everyone.